What you're about to hear is from my introduction to Emmanuel Levinas's Totality and Infinity course. These lectures were done to be accessible to people who have not done the reading. If you are interested in diving in deeper, doing the reading, or want access to the deep dives into my notes and the questions concerning translation, then you will want to become a subscriber to my ongoing research seminar. I can save all of that extra content for people who really want to dive in deeper. This lecture is meant to be a lot more accessible. Subscribers to the seminar get lectures I do with my wife Anne, but they also get access to my deep dives into Das Kapital, Being in Time, and Totality and Infinity, as well as a bunch of other works related to critical media theory, critique of political economy, and the foundations of time-energy theory. You can learn more about becoming a subscriber in the description down below. And part 2 of Totality and Infinity course is going to kick off in October 2025. With that, I hope you enjoy this lecture. All right, everybody, welcome to week 3 of Totality and Infinity. We are making headway here. We only have one more week, is that right? One more week before we are through this half of the text. The second half will be in October. Part of the reason that I did that is because, when you're doing something like Phenomenology of Spirit or Being in Time, and you're just going all the way through it within the, 10 or 18 week kind of range, burnout really does start to hit you in about a week from now, or like 2 weeks from now. At some point in that journey, you're going to go, I haven't been doing anything but sleeping and reading this book, And at some point, you just kind of got to go, I have other things to do, right? Well, I have done other things in the last few weeks, but for the most part, this has dominated my waking life. And I have no regrets, and I'm quite happy with that. Preparation for the lectures is one thing, but going into the notes and doing the discussions and the tarrying with the text with Terrence, all of that is, that's 3 days of my week, right? So it's a lot more demanding than any course I've ever taught before. And it's definitely above my pay grade, right? Like, I'm not actually getting paid to do this in a sort of sense. Like, you've all given some kind of like a nominal fee to participate, but that's not really what it was about. If I was trying to make money, I would not be teaching Levinas, that's for sure. Like, Levinas he's just not where the money comes from in the world of theory, Probably something like 1,000 Plateaus would get way better signups, right? Or just some like Lacan or Žižek. But I'm at this stage in my own development where I need to focus on certain things. And there are things that I feel like are underrated. And I take a unique kind of enjoyment, I think, getting to introduce you to something that I suspect most of you have never encountered, right? A kind of thinking, a style of thought that you've never encountered before. And so it's like there's this part of me that just wants to say, no, we need Levinas. We need Levinas. And then also this part of me that's just excited to like kind of make that case for you all, to kind of show you. But burnout, if you can go one more week, you'll actually be halfway through the text, and then you get to take a huge break. That's the main thing that I wanted to say. You get to take a huge break. And in that time, you can revisit lectures. You can revisit the times that we're going over notes. You can revisit the tarrying with Terrence stuff. You can watch the exegeticals people do. You'll have months to do that before the next time that this course resumes. Now, with that said, something I was going to talk about before I started recording, but then I realized, no, I should say this on the recording, is there are people in this course currently enrolled who I have not heard from. I'm not actually sure if they are keeping up. Now, I know that Orla is in the background listening to all the lectures, and she's stoked. She said that she's getting a lot from this. But that kind of message means a lot to me. And so if you are in the background listening, please let me know. There are a couple of people who are scholarship participants who I have not seen or heard from. And so please let me know. If you are a scholarship student at Totality and Infinity, let me know how it's going. Let me know if you're getting something from it. Let me know if you decided to back out, that kind of thing. But the same message applies to people listening in the future. If you're working your way through this, you've signed up for my seminar in the future, and you're just working your way through Totality Infinity, now's a great time to reach out and let me know. All right. Now, with that said, I know that Christopher and Will and Zachary and Ken and Nance and Anne are getting something from this, different things in different ways. But overall, I've heard great things. And so it's great to have you all here. Let's get into it. So Terry, as he is called in Australia, Terry, he is the one with whom we tarry with this text, right? So we're calling it tarrying with the text, right? This is supposed to be a double entendre, a play off of his name. Well, he was the one who alerted me 2 weeks ago, I think, to this word participation throughout this text. And I started looking into it, and I realized, in the index, participation is only listed once. There's one page number for participation. So I've had to add to the index like 6 other really important moments where Levinas is explicitly speaking of this idea of participation. So what is participation? Obviously, you're all participating in this lecture if you show up and you're paying attention and you're taking notes and you're thinking and you're trying to wrap your head around what's going on here, then you're participating. But that is not what Levinas is talking about. The word that gets translated into English as participation is a word that relates to this text, which I have not memorized it yet, so I'm just going to go off screen here and scroll to the top of the text and read off the title for you all. It's called, I don't even remember the name of the author. It starts with a B. Let's see. It might be like Brule or something like that, like Bruler or something. It won't load. I'll have to give up in a second. It's called Primitive Mentality by Lucien Levy Bruhl, who lived from 1857 to 1939. He was a contemporary of Durkheim. So Levy Bruhl, Bruhl. This Levy Bruhl, Primitive Mentality. It's about the way that prehistoric or hunter-gatherer types of people exist. How do they think? That, right, this is old anthropology. It's generally called racist. Of course, I think most people who are part of the left PMC today are also racist. And so, there's this big question mark as to what is real racism and what's the kind that's the worst. And I think that to dignify the concern when it comes to someone like Bruhl talking about primitives is that this is during the age of colonialism, that a lot of anthropology is lending itself to a legitimation narrative for treating other people, in dehumanizing ways. You say, well, they're just animals, or they're just children. They don't have logic and reason. And so whatever we have to do to get them in line, to get them to evolve, it's our white man's burden. We have to do this. That's that sort of concern when dealing with old anthropology. But of course, I mean, like I'm saying, the left PMC today has, it's not really left this idea of the white man's burden. Now the white man's burden is that we're all supposed to be super apologetic for our wages of whiteness, and we're supposed to admit that we have tremendous amounts of privilege on the basis of our skin, which is of course used to wash away any sort of actual class composition that was a condition of possibility for our entrance into the university spaces in which this kind of research is conducted. So there's still like that sort of white man's burden vibe. It's just not called that. It's called anti-racism or whatever. And that's fine. There's always like a grain of truth to that. There's also a grain of truth to Rudyard Kipling's poetry, right? I personally hate the whole thing. I don't like this thinking of ourselves as white people thing. I don't think that that's the best way forward. I think that it's causing a lot of problems right now for thinking about genuine concerns about what it means to belong, right? People are saying, oh, you know, there's this demographic change in effect. White people are being replaced. On the other side, you have this, oh, well, it's all just made up. There's nothing there. People are people. People should just be able to be moved around by capital willy-nilly. And, you know, there's no negative effects. And if you have a problem with that, then you're racist. And both sides to me seem insufficient. Now, I'm just putting my cards on the table. I don't want to use this as like my pulpit to actually give you my opinion when it comes to, you know, that discourse. I do have a bunch of thoughts on it. Maybe I'll write about it. Maybe I'll do a stream about it someday. Who cares? For now, I'm just trying to say I don't see this Brule guy or any other problematic anthropologist as necessarily more problematic than what we currently have in woke PMC anthropology, which David Graeber wrote a great little essay about back in, I think, like 2010, around then. And it has to do with the PMC being the class, or the even if we're not going to say it's a class, the organ of class reproduction that is I want to say almost like completely responsible for the way that anthropology is carried out today, right? So Graeber, author of Debt, and also this more recent book that he co-authored with someone whose name I'm forgetting, called The Dawn of Everything. He's a famous anthropologist, right? But he's also very heterodox. And so he takes issue with a lot of these tendencies. And a lot of the tendencies that he talks about in that essay have to do with this mode that just says that social justice is when we're super reflexive about our privilege, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you're curious about any of that, ask me for that link later. But that was enough of what I almost think was like a disclaimer. You know what I mean? It's not really a disclaimer because I'm just saying it's all problematic anyway. We have to think for ourselves. But what Brule is dealing with is the fact that from Australia to Central, East, West, and South Africa, to Native Americans, to South Americans, to Papua New Guinea, the Fiji Islands. Like these are his main examples throughout primitive mentality. There is a sort of unifying thread across all of these different peoples. They used to be called prehistoric peoples, but of course they have their own history, and so we don't call them that anymore. But, you know, hunter-gatherers is one way of saying it. That's to say that they don't farm. Well, actually, in a lot of cases, they did also farm, and so that's also not the best way of talking about them. So they just use the word primitive, which is to say it's simple. They have a simple way of life. Their civilizations are not super complex. Their languages are not at this level because like they're not writing books, right? Book publishing is not a thing. Okay, so with all of that said, what does participation have to do with Emmanuel Levinas? Participation, like I'm saying, is this word that comes from French. It's translated as participation, but what it refers to is basically immersion in the world. A sort of unreflective immersion that is taking for granted the ways that things appear and attributing almost all causes to supernatural causes. Okay. So obviously we still have some of that today. Doing alien anthropology in the United States, for example, would I think in part mean that we're aware that we're not just surrounded by a bunch of enlightened moderns, right? We're surrounded by people who have a lot in common with primitives, except that they think of themselves as literate, and therefore their functional illiteracy is a lot more dangerous, right? In the case of the primitive, like the white person shows up with technology and books and is seen as a wizard, and they think the clothes that this person was wearing must have been produced at the bottom of the ocean, right? Like there's all kinds of crazy things that they believed about these white wizards. Oh my God. But of course, if you're in the United States, you are the white wizard, you think. And of course, that's why we have this crazy resurgence of New Age astrology, superstitious kinds of beliefs, practices, and crystals. I'm being a little crass, but I am trying to draw this comparison to say that in the one case, the people go, oh yeah, this is how we live, and you guys are like magical aliens. You guys know so much. Why are you so superior to us? It must be because of the gods. It must be because of witchcraft. Whereas here, people are just like, yeah, that's right. We are wizards, right? And they either say, well, it's because science, which is like this magical entity to them that just dispenses truths, or it's because they believe the earth is 6,000 years old. They have this literalist, interpretation of the Bible, or yes, the star that you were born under tells us everything we need to know about you, right? Like, so I'm saying that superstition is everywhere. And this is a problem for Levinas. It's a genuine problem for him. He sees this rise of paganism, neo-paganism, and the occult as part and parcel to the Nazi project, right? This idea to go back before the influence of Judaism through Christianity is something that Levinas is concerned by, right? He thinks that genuine advances were made through both Judaism and the Greeks. But of course, for the likes of Heidegger, no, yeah, we want to rid ourselves of those Jewish influences. We want to rid ourselves of the Roman influences. We want to rid ourselves of blah, 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 and go back to some kind of like a pagan, Greco-pagan mythos, right? And so this is part of the actual National Socialist trajectory. It's part of its history. And Levinas doesn't think it's purely opportunistic. There is a way of talking about it where people talk, Nazis thought that there were magical powers in these historic artifacts, or these relics. And then on the other side, people say, no, they didn't really think that, but they wanted to give themselves like this allure, this sort of aura of having access to some deep occult, primordial knowledge. And that goes right along with Mussolini's, the idea of fascism or whatever. He wrote a piece called What is Fascism? And in it, he basically is saying, yes, take everything that works, whether that be the Catholic Church and nationalism and, some anti-Semitism or whatever, combine that into something, and create a new mythos that unifies all those things, right? So that's already this idea developed by Mussolini and Hitler and co. They run with that. That's That's part of it. That's part of the history. And that's something that Levinas is looking at. And Levinas is going, it's not just to make themselves look smart or look like they have secret powers. It's because once you decide we're not going to go with monotheism, one of the great monotheisms, with a sort of universalism based in an invisible God, but instead you're going to go with the old gods. Like that sort of return to the old gods is something to be concerned about for Levinas. Why? Well, let's take it back to this idea of participation. Participation, immersion in the elements is a way of talking about it. This next week's reading is going to have a lot about the elements and the elemental, and it's one of the coolest parts of the whole book. What you are about to read, assuming that you are actually reading through this text, is a section on separation as life. You're going to get into separation and reflection, or enjoyment. Sorry, not. So separation is based in sensibility and enjoyment, right? And then those things are more important than reflection and intentionality. And so he's going to spend some time critiquing Husserl. And then he's going to get into the elemental, because there's something like infinity. There's something like transcendence in nature itself. And he wants to separate those two things and say, look, you've got the pure idea of infinity. You've got the pure sort of transcendence that comes from the actual other. And then you've kind of got like this thing that gets in the way of that experience of infinity. And that thing that gets in the way is the elemental itself, which is, properly speaking, epic. It's properly speaking epic. It's powerful. It's too much to grasp or comprehend. The elemental is not just things. It's the conditions of possibility for the things. It's the wind. You don't see the wind. You see its effects, or you see its edge, he says, right? You don't see the ocean. You see one of its faces. But you know that the other side of the ocean ain't like that face. Like that face of the ocean, what is its obverse, right? It's a mystery, but it's like this, it's this almost infinite plenitude, right? And so he's going to kind of do stuff like that with the ocean, with space, with the forests, right? We have access to the elemental at its edges. We live between all of these immense plenitudes of different elements, which he says are pure qualities without substance, right? It's very fascinating. But this idea of immersion as participation, this primitive way of living, is to say you're steeped in the elemental. Now, we're all steeped in the elemental, but the primitive is steeped in the elemental and takes the elemental to be these faceless gods, or these, is it faceless? Or he says impersonal gods. So you have impersonal gods, you have faceless gods, but it's like the vastness and powers, like the vast powers of nature. Like that's what you feel. And when you live under all of that and you have no science, you have no way of really dealing with nature, except through magic or the occult or mysticism. This is the primitive way of seeing things, according to Brühl. Brühl says, report after report after report from across the world, from, like I said, Australia through East, West, South, Central Africa, Native Americans, North and South, all of the islands. There's certain things that are true across all of these different peoples or tribes. And what is it? a sort of hatred, disdain, or ridicule of logic itself, combined with a certain way of answering almost every kind of problem that arises. So, what is the one way of answering all of these things here? So, what caused someone to fall off of a cliff and die? What caused someone to be bitten by a snake? What caused somebody to fall into a river and drown? What caused a person to be eaten by a wolf or a tiger? Right? What caused someone's house to get burnt down? The answer in all of these cases, across all of these places, is it must have been the enemy doing some voodoo or some witchcraft or putting some spell on you, some hex on you, right? In fact, in the case of like the wolf or the tiger, that person's enemy must have transformed into a wolf or a tiger. Now, who was that person's enemy? Oh, it was this person in this tribe. We have to go to war. Let's go to war now. Or maybe we don't know what the cause of something was, so we have to get the skull of somebody and fill it with certain kinds of liquid and do some kind of like a ritual and then cut open an animal and spill out its entrails and then sacrifice a child, and at the end of the day you'll get your answer. You'll figure out what the cause was, right? Now, I think there's all kinds of ways of problematizing that go way deeper than just, oh, it's racism, right? There is like this sort of like European enlightened, oh, we have science and we know, and then we come to these people and we say, hey, we have the solutions and we're the smart ones, we're the wise wizards, trust us. And they go, you're not that great, and also you don't have our best interests in mind, and so we're just going to gaslight you and we're going to mess with you, right? So not only is there bias on the side of the anthropologists, but there's also deception and self-defense on the side of the reporters. That's not what they're called. Informants, right? On the side of the informants. So, that should throw a real curveball at anybody who's just thinking you can go back to old anthropology. It's not just the biases of the person doing the research. There's also just the fact that along with that superstition comes like an actual aversion to the state, to state power, to state control, to financial markets, to turning everything into something that's exchangeable through the commodity form and or money, right? And so people value their freedom from all of that, and not just because they're irrational. There's actually a lot of great reasons to say, that doesn't look like the best way of life, right? And so on the one side, you have like this sort of Brule approach that is saying, yes, they're basically like naive children and they're all superstitious, and, overnight they could go from being your friend to thinking that a demon told them they have to kill you, right? So you just, what do we do with these people? That's the Brule approach. I'm probably doing him a terrible injustice. But on the other side, you have this other kind of bias that's going into the field, assuming that they're the ones that are in touch with the real human nature. They're the ones in touch with primitive communism. They're the ones that we have to learn from because they have something special that we have lost, that we want to go back to, something that we can learn from. And with that sort of agenda comes its own kind of biases in the research. And I don't really know what to do about anthropology and these sort of competing schools of research and with their own kinds of biases. I look forward to people sharing with me lots of great sources for looking at sort of definitive, more fair treatments that don't just take one way or the other. And for now, we read stuff like David Graeber. We read stuff like James Scott. We read guys like Kojin Karatani. And then the rest of this we treat like it's history, and, we have a little bit more critical distance from it. But Emmanuel Levinas was profoundly influenced by this Brule guy. in how he conceives of people in this mode of what he calls participation. So let's use that as our springboard and actually use some examples of participation appearing in the text, and then I'll show you how it ties into the sections you'll be reading this week, and I think it'll really unlock the reading for this week. All right, check. Can you hear me just fine this way? This microphone's doing just great. Is it clipping? No. Okay, perfect. So yeah, if you go back to the index at the end of Totality and Infinity, and you go to participation on page 313, you'll see that they have a single reference on page 61. Let's start with that one. Okay. At the very bottom of the page, he says, in rootedness, a primordial pre-connection would maintain participation as one of the sovereign categories of being, whereas the notion of truth marks the end of this reign. Participation is so that was at the bottom of page 60. Now we're at the top of page 61. Participation is a way of referring to the other. It is to have and unfold one's own being without at any point losing contact with the other. Something I touched on a couple days, was it yesterday? Something I touched on yesterday or the day before was Simon Critchley in The Problem with Levinas, which is just a great set of lectures that he gave on Levinas, says that the most important basic idea of totality and infinity is that there is a relation. It's an ethical relation, but it's not a necessary relation because we can absolve ourselves from that relation. We can cut ourselves off from it. And not like in this sort of dialectical way where that becomes like a determinate negation, where cutting yourself off from the other now defines you in all these ways. It's not dialectical. It's the interiority opened up by enjoyment through sensation and the separation that causes, where you could live your whole life self-obsessed and never feeling responsible to the other. That is something that we have to deal with, and it's a fundamental reality. It's a fundamental reality that comes prior to all science, prior to all philosophy, prior to the development of any ethical system. And what he's getting at here goes right along with that. He says that participation is a way of referring to the other. It is to have and unfold one's own being without at any point losing contact with the other. Right? The idea of separation when you are living in one of these groups that anthropologists like Brule were trying to understand, they don't have it. They don't have separation. They don't have this kind of ability to become so self-engrossed and self-centered that you don't feel like you're constantly responsible for everyone around you, right? So that's actually, I think, part of what the other competing school of anthropology that I outlined appreciates. They appreciate this idea that we have that sort of sense of communal belonging and obligation that comes from this immersed participation that cannot be cut off. To cut yourself off from it would be to kill yourself. To cut yourself off from it, to become an exile, would be to die. You actually need this embeddedness for survival, but not just that. Like it's what makes life worth living, this belonging. TU is building a studio. I have officially cleared ground. I've been working on it for the last several months on and off, but am, as of this last week,
beginning to get a lot more traction on the project because more money has come in. So thank you so much for those who have already contributed via donations for the TU studio. It's going to happen no matter what, but the question is when. If you want to help speed up the process, make things smoother sailing, and help me keep creating the kinds of content that you love, and even better, the kinds of content that is to come. There's a whole new era getting rolled out. If you want to help make it possible and usher it in smoother and faster, the best way to do that is to make a donation via the Zelle link up on the screen here. You see that QR code? Use that QR code. Once you have an account, that QR code should take you to where you can make the bank transfer with zero charge, which is really sweet, huh? Yeah, we love that. That's why we're using Zelle. Thank you so much for helping make this possible.
He says to break with participation is, to be sure, to maintain contact, but no longer drive one's being from this contact. It is to see without being seen, like Gyges. And so Gyges, remember, he's Frodo with the ring. He's able to be unaccountable to anyone else and do anything he wants to. And I've said with our smartphones today, we're all Gyges. It's pretty easy to ignore most people in most situations and just be on your phone. But that's just a more obvious example of something that we, saying this like people that live in big civilizations and are at least somewhat literate, have been able to do for a long time, which is basically escapism, right? We're able to escape from this participation that is incessantly referring to one another. So what this is kind of saying, and it's not just on the page here, but as we'll move forward with this thread of participation, is that reflective thought and the idea of an I that is able to be separate and logical and then engage in reason. All of these things come from a person who is no longer in this state of participation. And none of us are, right? This is something that marks us off from humans over the course of millions of years who were in this state of participation. That could mean that we are evolved, but it could just as well mean that we are fallen. And it, another way of saying it could be that we're broken, right? That there's something essential to the human experience that we're cut off from. And a lot of the time, that is what people have in mind when they're thinking of Marxist alienation. And that is not, properly speaking, Marx's alienation. Marx's alienation it deals with the fruit of your labor not being yours, you not getting to have it, you not being fairly compensated for it, you not having any say over the process, you not having any understanding of the process of production, and ultimately not being able to engage in the kinds of liberal arts that would make it possible to digest the world through what he calls spiritual nourishment. But that is not the kind of species being that most people are talking about when they're thinking about human nature or human species being or primitive communism, or when they're talking about alienation, which presupposes all of those things I just said. No, for most people, it's like they're sort of romanticizing participation, right? I romanticize participation still. If you watch the Being in Time course, if you were a part of that course, Christopher, you were there. I played that video from that documentary called Baraka. And it has that moment where, or a scene where I think there's like probably 150 guys and they're all like tatted up and they're all doing this chant and they're all doing this swaying with this chanting. And it's clearly an ecstatic experience. Like it's like they're clearly like not just in their individual bodies. They're a part of this bigger organism. And it's like their trance that they're in is like, oh God, I wish I could do that. I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to do it all the time, but I wish I could do it sometimes. Like to be able to have that kind of immersed, ecstatic experience is arguably why people go to football games and get really, really into it, right? It's arguably why people super invest into all kinds of spectacular occasions that make themselves, that reduce themselves to like, you know, some part that blends into the bigger whole, and you kind of lose yourself in that moment. For me, that was concerts, right? Well, that's us trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Participation was never broken, right? For the people who live in this mode of immersion, it was never broken. And they don't have language and philosophy and science and math in the ways that we do. They have like proto forms of these things. But with it comes this sort of recalcitrant belief in the natural attitude, which is taking things at face value. And that doesn't just mean like, oh, it looks like a tree, it must be a tree. But also, if you look at the tree and then this idea pops into your head, that tree is dangerous, then you're instantly going to go, stay away from that tree, right? Like when you go through normal life and you have like an idea pop into your head, like, oh, what if that person wanted to kill me? Or what if this person's lying? You know, it's like, oh, that's an interesting idea. But there's this other approach, this very superstitious approach that says, well, why did that idea appear to me if it wasn't true? It must be true. Like it's getting at something very important, and bad things have happened previously when I ignored that voice. And so I better just go with it, or not voice, but hunch, right? Like you take premonitions to be true, right? So participation. I'm just going to keep beating this. Let's go back to the index. This is pre-separated humanity for Levinas. So when he's talking about separation at the end of last week's reading, or when he's talking about separation at the beginning of this week's reading, separation as life, it is literally the opposite of participation, which is to say the ability to not live in reference to others and to just dig down within oneself and have a rich, happy life. He's not saying it's going to be the most empty thing. No, he's going to actually say you can have a happy life this way. I don't know if he would use the word rich. I might be exaggerating with that one, but we'll go with it. On page 88 and then page 90. We'll go to page 88. He brings back participation again. There's probably other points that he brought it up, but there's a point in particular that I think is worth looking at here. He says, to be sure, the atheism of the I marks the break with participation and consequently the possibility of seeking a justification for oneself. That is a dependence upon an exteriority without this dependence absorbing the dependent being, held in invisible meshes. Okay, what is he talking about? A dependence. He says seeking a he says, so yes, atheism of the I. We talked about this last week. The atheism of the I, the ability to believe in nothing, to just live for oneself, right? This atheism of the I marks the break with participation, this immersion in the elemental, and this taking everything at face value. And consequently, the possibility of seeking a justification for oneself, right? Because you are broken off from all of that, now you can actually try to justify yourself. You wouldn't be able to justify yourself if you didn't have this strong sense of a yourself in the first place, right? Me, ego, myself is sort of a precondition for that justification. And then he says that is a dependence upon an exteriority without this dependence absorbing the dependent being. Now that's to say you need others in order to justify yourself. But also it is the fact that there are others that makes you have to justify yourself in the first place, right? The shame of your freedom running amok and of moral failure, of finding yourself called into question by the other, is the cause for this need to justify oneself. So in that sense, we are dependent on this kind of exteriority through the other. But that dependence is not a dependence that conquers us, right? Going back to what Critchley said, it's a relation that we can absolve ourselves from, or from which we can absolve ourselves. This dependence, consequently, at the same time, maintains independence, right? Because justifying your freedom actually deepens your interiority in a sort of sense. It sort of doubles down on that separation, right? So this justifying of oneself, this response that is dependent on that exteriority, also makes you independent in some way. Separation itself makes us independent in a way. And he'll be playing with this idea of dependence and independence all throughout the reading for this week. So it's something you'll really want to pay attention to whenever he's talking about dependence and independence. Because he wants to show, yes, you are dependent on the elemental, on nature. But the kind of dependence that you have on nature actually opens up this other kind of independence. Now on page 90, right at the top here underneath part 1, part C, subsection 3, truth presupposes justice, the first sentence sets up this clause about participating. He says, the spontaneous freedom of the I, unconcerned with its justification, is an eventuality inscribed in the essence of the separated being. A being no longer participating and hence drawing from itself its own existence, coming forth from a dimension of interiority, a being conformable to the fate of Gyges, who sees those who look at him without seeing him, and who knows that he is not seen. That's the person who lives today, who knows he can get away with anything, and that if he gets caught, he could eventually just move somewhere else and start all over again. That's the life of somebody who participates in or enables gross, humane, degrading acts without doing them firsthand, and therefore is just like, oh, I'm not really accountable to anybody, right? And the ability to be steeped in one's interiority, to feel oneself totally separate, to feel oneself not accountable at all, to feel like there's no reason to have to justify oneself, this is Gyges. Every time he brings up Gyges, that's what we're getting at. And he's saying, every one of us, insofar as we are separated beings, has that capacity. And then let's go back to this index where I've added a couple of other page numbers, 120, then 132, then 135. 132 and 135 gets us into this week's reading. But I just thought, it would be great to kind of just weave all of these parts that you may have already read into this this theme that then I think sets us up really well for the beginning of separation as life, which is the first part of this week's reading. So on 120, which was
No, yeah, this is this week. Okay, so we're officially onto this week with Separation is Life, which starts on 109. On 120, he says, in the exaltation of biological life, the person arises as a product of the species or of impersonal life, which has recourse to the individual so as to ensure its impersonal triumph. The unicity of the I, its status as a conceptless individual, would disappear in this participation.
Yo, what's up, listener or viewer?
Yo, yo, yo.
How you doing?
So I noticed you sitting there watching this video.
Yep, we see
And yeah, you're listening, you're paying attention. You're definitely not hearing everything we're saying though.
Yep. Nope, definitely not. You're not taking notes.
Yeah, take notes, dude. What are you doing?
Hey, you know what? If you want to be passive and just enjoy this content while multitasking, that's what we do as well. Everyone does that most of the time. We very rarely switch into this more active mode, and that's fine. That's fine because you're kind of absorbing this content as you go through your life, and that's great. But if you're going to do that, then we just have a little request of you. What's our little request, Nance?
We want you to do the algorithm things. We want you to hit the button, the thumbs up, or the thumbs down. Hit the subscribe button. You could even hit the bell so you get notified when there's an epic marathon stream.
Yep.
Or one of the dope ass interviews. We just finished a dope ass interview.
Absolutely.
But do the things to help train your algorithm to actually give you content that you prefer. And at least here we are aware of the problem. We are aware that we're all infected with the algorithm, and we're trying to do something about it. So while you can like maintain a cynical distance of like not being an enthusiastic vocal supporter,
right,
doing those actions actually, first of all, it helps the channel, it helps Theory Underground, but it helps your algorithm too. You will get less kind of shitty clickbait React content if you train your algorithm to give you what you prefer. I mean, you're already here. You're already watching this.
Yeah.
So
enthusiastic, unironic, genuine support might be a little too much for some of you who are way too cool for that kind of thing. But you can at least hit the little like button, and then we'll say we're even. Okay?
There we go. You owe us nothing now.
Yeah. Let's get back to it. Would disappear in this participation in what exceeds it. This is his paragraph about biology. He's basically trying to say that the eye of enjoyment is not a biological thing, right? And he's saying, if it was just a biological thing, well, then it would just disappear in participation. And then he's going to dunk on a sort of liberalism or liberalistic sociology. And he does all of that in the last 2 pages of part A of section 2, Separation is Life. But I'm going to skip to the end, and then we'll work our way back from the beginning. So 132, the whole thing about not being subsumed to our biology and everything like that will make a lot more sense in a little bit. We'll get to it. At the top of 132, he says, he is within what he possesses. Who's he? Let's just go back a page. I think it's just man in this case, right? Right. Man has overcome the elements only by surmounting this interiority without issue by the domicile, which is to say your home, which confers upon him an extraterritoriality, right? We're able to create our own environment, our own controlled environment separated from the elemental. Those who live in this state of participation, maybe they live in a lean-to, in a teepee, in an igloo, but it's like so close to the elemental and so caught up in the elemental that it's not like they have like this sharp division between the wild and their domicile. Their domicile is a controlled environment that
that confers upon him an extraterritoriality. And then he says he gets a foothold in the elemental by a side already appropriated, a field cultivated by me, the sea in which I fish and moor my boats, the forest in which I cut wood, and all these acts, all this labor, refer to the domicile. Man plunges into the elemental from the domicile, the primary appropriation of which we shall speak further. Yeah, so he'll get more into this dwelling in an actual section called dwelling. But it comes up here because he's talking about the elemental and what is it that is the condition of possibility for our separation in the first place. He says it's the domicile. Like that's the very beginning of it. Now back at the page of top 132, he says, he is within what he possesses, such that we shall be able to say that the domicile, condition for all property, renders the inner life possible. The word possible in my edition is missing an L. It could be that there's a word I don't know about, possible. Maybe it means something else, but I think it's possible. So yeah, the domicile, condition for all property, renders the inner life possible. The I is thus at home with itself. When I was reading this yesterday, I was at the coffee shop and this guy came up and asked me what I was reading, and we talked for a little bit, and he told me about what he was up to and everything like that, and he wanted to like go do things. He's clearly like, he's like, I'm going to go make a friend. And he said, yeah, I like to come here because otherwise I'll just stay in my house for days on end. Right? Like, because he's a grad student. What he studies is online mostly. He doesn't have to leave. We really have gotten to this point where you don't have to leave your interiority. You could spend your whole life just in your house. Yeah, the I is thus at home with itself. Through the home, our relation with space as distance and extension is substituted for the simple bathing in the element. That bathing in the element is that direct participation that we have now been removed from. And I've seen people say things like, if I was a little bit younger, I'd just be writing on a Substack and I would live homeless. I don't see why more people aren't just living homeless. Someone said that to me this week, in fact. And I was thinking about it and I was just like, in a sort of idyllic way, sure. But you kind of have to be removed from what it really is to be homeless in the United States to think that that's the headspace from which you could do a lot of serious writing. Like you could do it. But what kind of writing are we talking about? What kind of research would be required? You can't just travel anywhere you want in the country and then like check out books from the library. Like you actually have to be a resident to be able to get those books in the first place. But I mean, what if you're living in a tent city or under a bridge or anywhere else that you can find if you're homeless, then the fact is so can other people who are also homeless, which means that the chances are you're going to have to deal with other people. And the kinds of people that you're going to have to deal with in this situation, in a lot of cases, are going to be drug addicts. They're going to be all up in your business, right? There is a sort of fraternity and a loving community or beloved community that can come about in a homeless encampment, right? But also people get stabbed, people overdose, the cops come through and start hitting people. There's a lot of problems. I mean, also there's vigilante justice, so-called, where people will come and just mace you in the face while you're sleeping. These are not the conditions in which you are able to come at text in this sort of state of skole, right? The active leisure that Bourdieu is talking about, that is one of the presuppositions of the scholastic mentality or mode.
It requires being removed from stress, distraction, and economic necessity. And the person who's saying that they kind of like wish that they could go experience that, it's like, yeah, you're a perfect example of what Bourdieu's talking about, right? You're taking for granted your distance from the shittier aspects of this situation, right? I mean, fuck, it's bad enough living with a roommate who's messy. It's bad enough living with a roommate who's loud. It's bad enough living with a roommate who walks up and asks you what you're reading and then puts the TV on while you're trying to study. Like, if you've not experienced these things yet, well, it's not fun, right? All of this, bringing it right back to the top of page 132, is what the domicile, properly speaking, a real home, counters. It counters those distractions. It counters a lot of those stresses. It controls for the future a little bit more. It's the condition for all property, but it's also the condition for the inner life itself. He is saying that the primitive mentality is not one that has an inner life, or you could say much of an inner life. I think that would be more fair to his position, even though he's not here to defend it and he doesn't say that himself. I think he probably would say that they have an inner life, it's just not much, right? They have language, so they must have some kind of an inner life, right? But the point is that there's no secrets. Like, there's no secrets. Everyone's living out in the open. Everybody knows everybody. And you're in direct participation with the world, fully immersed in it. And then finally, 135. At the beginning of, so this is 2b, part 4, he says, but to posit the element as a quality without substance. And remember, the element is, the endlessness of the ocean, the absolute depths that just like overwhelm us. Or it's this, just like you're standing at the edge of a forest that you live off of, but you are aware that that forest just goes. It just goes and goes and goes, and you could get lost in there. That's the elemental. This quality without substance does not amount to admitting the existence of a mutilated or still stammering thought correlative of such phenomena. This is his critique of Husserl. He's saying that the elemental cannot be an intentional object. To be in the element does indeed disengage a being from blind and deaf participation in a whole, but differs from a thought making its way outward. So, he says, here, on the contrary, the movement comes incessantly upon me as a wave that engulfs and submerges and drowns, an incessant movement of afflux without respite, a total contact without fissure nor gap from which the reflected movement of a thought could arise. It is to be within, to be inside of, ... This situation is not reducible to a representation, nor even an inarticulate representation. It belongs to sensibility, which is the mode of enjoyment. A couple of things I want to put up on the whiteboard. Nobody can hear the noise, right? It's a really loud airplane that's flying over. Right? No one hears it? Good. I can hear it. I can ignore it. So, I want to show you guys consciousness of with 3 dots, or you say an ellipses afterwards. Consciousness of ... That is referring to Husserl every time you see it. Consciousness of anything is always, willing or judging or almost any kind of intentional act is always involving consciousness of whatever it is, which is to say that this sharp division between the subject and the world of objects and the mind versus the world of matter breaks down in Husserl's theory of intentionality, because he wants to show that all things, I'll just put X, Y, Z, all things that we can will, all things that we can judge, all things that we can perceive, all of these are, in a sort of sense, he's going to show, products of consciousness. I was thinking a lot before going into this lecture today about like how much Husserl did I really want to have to try to break down. And I kind of don't want to have to much at all. I kind of just want to alert you to consciousness of ... He's always referring to Husserl. This is the secret key, according to phenomenology, for breaking out of subject-object dualism. But as Levinas will say at one point in this week's reading, there is this hard-nosed realism, like hardcore realism, that Husserl brings to everything he does, which makes you think, oh yeah, this guy's not idealist, he's super scientific. But then, in a really weird way, all of a sudden, it turns out that everything we've ever been conscious of is like a construction of our mind, right? Like that's like this sort of weird thing going on there in Husserl's attempt to get outside of subject-object or mind-matter dualism. But to give the devil his due, we don't have direct access to anything in itself. What we have is, sense data comes through the apparatus, or the various apparatuses that make up our you just call it the sensory apparatus. And what we receive is on the other side of all of that, right? And what we perceive is not what the bat perceives, right? But because our experience of time is so much different than all other creatures, presumably the things we perceive and the way we perceive them and the ways that we're able to engage with them are just fundamentally different from all other creatures, and not just because we have opposable thumbs, not just because we have bigger temporal lobes, right? There's actually something about the categories of the mind itself and the actual structure of our brain, if you want to go there. But that's not where Husserl's going to go. He's going to stay at the level of the mind. And what can we deduce about our equipment that is used to interpret the world and to categorize the world? What can we deduce about it from the kinds of objects that we intend, which is to say that we see through our consciousness? That's the most important thing for Husserl. It's what he's remembered for. And I'm not doing it justice at all. And in fact, I'm doing a terrible job. I don't care. It doesn't really matter that much. You just need to know that much. I promise that's all you really need to know for now. We can come back to it later. I do want to work through the ideas 1 and 2 as a part of what I'm doing here at Theory Underground. And so I'll try to sell you all on Husserl later. But for now, it's just, there's this consciousness of thing is like the essence of intentionality. And that what Husserl wants to do is bracket out the natural attitude. So I'll just go ahead and put this word natural attitude in brackets. And what is the natural attitude? Well, it's something very similar to what I was just saying about folks in this state of participation, which is to say, taking things for granted as they appear to you. Now, of course, the scientific attitude is going to counter the natural attitude and say, we don't know anything about something just based off of how it appears. We actually have to to break it open and analyze it and categorize it, and then test hypotheses about it, and make sure that our concepts of it match how it actually works. Okay, and so turns out when you do that, you come to a lot of repeatable but nonetheless counterintuitive conclusions. Right? Physics is full of counterintuitive conclusions that it's like, well, we think that when you throw an object off of a cliff, it's going to follow this sort of arc, but in reality, it follows a completely different trajectory to what you expected, right? Well, that's because you have to leave the natural attitude and just like actually see what really happens when you subject it to experiments. So we bracket out the natural attitude, but not so that we can do natural science, not so that we can copy the natural sciences. Husserl is going to say no, so that we can develop our own science of mind in a sort of sense, right? He wants to turn philosophy into a science, but not one that borrows its criteria from specific regions of being opened up by the natural sciences. No, the human mind comes before the division between the natural sciences and the historical sciences. The human mind comes before that division, and the human mind was researching these various things that opened up these various fields or these regions of being, and was able to then come up with biology and chemistry and astrophysics, right? Or history and sociology and anthropology. The human mind is before all of those things, and so he wants to get back to the most base elements of consciousness themselves by bracketing out everything we think we know and just getting down to how does intentionality work? How does perception work? How does concept formation work? And so that's what Husserl wants to do, and he thinks that's the most important thing. Well, Levinas is going to say no. Yeah, as much as that might be important or whatever, it's not the most important thing. Prior to our consciousness of things comes the fact that we are living from things. And this is where, even if it wasn't fair to Husserl, even if he's not an idealist in the way that Marxists use the word, which he probably is, but even if he wasn't, Levinas is going to come out and just be like, yeah, he's an idealist and I'm not. Check me out. I'm super materialist. My theory is super, super materialist. And you're going to get that from here. Like from this week's reading, you're going to get this really materially based account of what it is to be in the world. He's going to say the there where we are is also very different from the there of Dasein, right? He says the da of Dasein, which is, of course, the being there. He's going to say the there we are, the there in which we are is radically different from Heidegger's being in the world. It's also very different from Husserl's whole approach, because both Heidegger and Husserl are presupposing this reliance on the elemental, this being steeped in the elemental. And the elemental is not something that fits into either Heidegger's equipmental totality approach or Husserl's consciousness of ... approach. But I don't want to get too into I guess I'll say it this way. I want to discourage you all, unless you are quite familiar already with Husserl. I want to discourage you from taking the fact that he's engaging with Husserl and intentionality and consciousness of too seriously, because I think it can distract from the fact that what he's saying poses a problem for basically all philosophers, or at least most philosophers. So it's not just Husserl. He's just using Husserl because Husserl's at the time that he's writing this, in the 1950s, right? He's writing it throughout the course of the 1950s. He publishes it in 1961. This is sort of Husserl's reign. Levinas was the one who brought Husserl into Paris. He was the one who first translated him. He was the one who wrote a book about him. Todd McGowan just said a couple days ago on the Theory Underground channel that Husserl wrote the best book. Levinas wrote the best book on Husserl. But with all that said, like, yeah, that's his master, and that's the, Husserl and Heidegger were like the two most important names at the moment. So Levinas is going to set himself apart from them. But what I'm saying is, yeah, but it's not just a problem for Husserl and Heidegger. It's also a problem for most philosophy. Anybody who puts thought and thinking and representation and rationality at the front of their project and thinks that that's the most important thing, Levinas is going to be like, well, there's something that comes before all of that, right? So even before separation from participation, there is enjoyment. And we're just going to read a few wonderful lines about enjoyment. 129 is a page that you'll probably underline every single word of. Who knows? Oh my God. So I was just like taking a look through the logical investigations before I started this lecture. And the copy I have, the person who must have read it before I got it, underlined every line. Every single line. I was like, I kind of want to go back and reread it and just pay attention to if there's a line that he didn't underline, and then do some kind of a Derridian deconstruction of his reading, being like, he missed the most important part, But all right, on 129, he says, actually, I'll start on the previous page here. Eating, for example, is, to be sure, not reducible to the chemistry of alimentation, which is, I think, a neologism of his, which he says is a term that can be used for the overflowing of meaning. But I also got confused here, and so we'll go over that on Thursday. Anyway, he says, but eating also does not reduce itself to the set of gustative, olfactory, kinesthetic, and other sensations that would constitute the consciousness of eating. This sinking one's teeth into the things which the act of eating involves, above all, measures the surplus of the reality of the aliment over every represented reality, a surplus that is not quantitative, but is the way the I, the absolute commencement, is suspended on the non-I. The corpority, the being in a body, right, of the living being, and its indigence as a naked and hungry body is the accomplishment of these structures. To be sure, in the satisfaction of need, the alienness of the world that founds me loses its alterity, its satiety. Is that really how you say that? In satiety, the real I sank my teeth into is assimilated. The forces that were in the other become my forces, become me. Through labor and possession, the alterity of nutriments enter into the same. Lower down, he says, the world I constitute nourishes me and bathes me. All of this is to say is that he's going to put the body front and center. On the previous page, he says the essence of the body is to accomplish my position on the earth, to give me, as it were, a vision already and henceforth born by the very image that I see. To posit oneself corporeally is to touch an earth, but to do so in such a way that the touching finds itself already conditioned by the position. The foot settles into a reel, which this very action outlines or constitutes. He's saying, it's getting too hot for my hoodie up here, I'm going to have to take this off in a second, but he's saying that the body and its sensations and this sort of the priority of the senses. All of this is prior to reflection, prior to intentionality, prior to, and more important in a sense than the referential totality of equipment in Heidegger. He will say that food is the end of enjoyment. Like we want to enjoy food. And he says that only in a system of exploitation is it possible to think of food as nothing more than an input, or what he says is an implement.
Oh, hey, Dave. What are you up to?
Hello. I'm grading right now. So.
Grading? Well, what's that?
Oh, this? This is a G2 pen. It might be the best pen in the entire world because the price point is perfect for working class people like us. More importantly, cartridges are replaceable. The ink, it glides, but it doesn't smudge too bad. And most importantly, you can do that. And it's really fun.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
We at Theory Underground are not sponsored by Pilot, nor does Pilot endorse this commercial. Theory Underground is funded by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.
And I think it's kind of counterintuitive. We were talking last week about the difference between needs and desires. I think I was wrong. I think that you guys were all correct. Like, it's just like, no, desire and enjoyment are always primary. The fact that we get nourishment from the things that we eat, he says, is a happy accident, right? It is our ability to enjoy things that opens up interiority itself, right? And that interiority is the condition of what he's calling separation, which is itself the thing that breaks away from participation. This section is, yes, a critique of Husserl and also a critique of Heidegger and also a critique of the tendency of philosophers to put ideas before the material bodies and elements and things that are presupposed by everything that we do and care about. But it is also his imminent critique of fascism. And he doesn't say that anywhere here in a very clear, obvious way. So I have to just put my cards on the table. I'm bringing that to the text thanks to Simon Critchley, who in The Problem with Levinas talks about how property and having a place and this sort of thinking that, you know, everyone has their place is the most important thing. This is a central concern of Levinas's. He wants to critique that. But if you just read this, and especially if you just read these sections, you would probably think that he is saying it's the best thing ever, that the domicile, the home, dwelling, you know, cutting ourselves off from participation, being in the being in this sort of extra terrestrial sort of controlled environment that opens up interiority, that is the condition of separation, but also therefore a condition of freedom, and through that being accountable to the other, having to answer to the other, therefore the condition of ethics itself. You would think that priority he's giving home and place would mean that he is the champion of these things. Yeah, he's not going to say that they're the most important thing in the world. He's going to say that there are more important things than that. But of course, he's going to give the devil his due and say that is important. Place is important. Home is important. These are the conditions of everything else. Now, just to stipulate, I was saying that what I got from Critchley is that he's problematizing place, and he's doing so as part of his critique of fascism. That's all I got from Critchley. Everything else I just said, I'm getting from this reading. But I want you to stay in this sort of there's a sort of immediate experience of reading pages 109 through to the end of part B, which is, I think, like, where is it? 142. And a lot of it is just like beautiful, 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 beautiful. It's some of the most beautiful writing you'll ever encounter. So, like, for instance, he says on page 133, which is, by the way, right after the previous page where he said the domicile makes the inner life possible. Here on 133, he says, okay, I'll start on the previous page just to get that one sentence, but he says, every object offers itself to enjoyment, a universal category of the empirical. Even if I lay hold of an object implement, if I handle it as a thing. So whenever you see Zeug, the German Zeug, it's just the German word for thing or stuff, depending. Like they call lighters Feuerzeug. It just means fire thing. They call airplanes whatever the word for sky, and then, or like sky thing, like they just put Zeug onto almost everything, right? So he'll just be kind of riffing off of Zeug here because he's bringing this into conversation with Heidegger. So yeah, if you handle it, if I handle it as a thing, right? So he's saying every object is offering itself to enjoyment. At one point, he's even going to say that if you find a way to avoid enjoyment in something, you're going to find a new way to enjoy it. Like it's like you're going to find everything ultimately satisfactory. He says the handling and utilization of tools, the recourse to all the instrumental gear of a life, whether to fabricate other tools or to render things accessible, concludes in enjoyment. As material or gear, the objects of everyday use are subordinated to enjoyment. The lighter to the cigarette one smokes. Straight up, I miss the lighter more than I miss the cigarette, right? But I miss the whole thing, but I miss the lighter more. The fork to the food, the cup to the lips, right? Why don't I drink out of like the little kid plastic cup and I go for the glass mason jar? It's because of how it feels on my lips, right? There's an enjoyment there. And so, of course, at the top of this page, I wrote micro-dosing jouissance. This is what Mikey was talking about. This page is a whole page of examples, right? Because Mikey was saying that for Bataille and Lacan, it's always these extreme forms of excess and expenditure, taking things to the limit. Yeah, but the way it feels to strike the lighter, or to stick your food with the fork, or to raise the cup to touch it against your lips, like he says, these refer to my enjoyment. This is an observation as commonplace as could be. Blah, blah, blah. He says, enjoyment, an ultimate relation with the substantial plenitude of being, with its materiality, embraces all relations with things. The structure of the Zeug as Zeug, thing as thing, and the system of references, Heidegger, in which it has its place, do indeed manifest themselves in concerned handling, which is definitely a translation, a way of speaking about Heidegger, like concerned handling. These things he's saying are indeed irreducible to vision, right? Heidegger was correct to talk about there's like this circumspective understanding of the background conditions that render intelligible the pen or the hammer. So he's saying, yes, that sort of ready to hand circumspective concern, it is irreducible to vision. Then he says, but they do not encompass the substantiality of objects, which is always there in addition. Moreover, furnishings, the home, food, clothing are not zoiga in the proper sense of the term. Clothing serves to protect the body or to adorn it, the home to shelter it, food to restore it. But we enjoy them or suffer from them. They are ends. Tools themselves, which are in view of ... become objects of enjoyment. And are in view of, we'd have to see the actual translation, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct here. This is just a translation, not the one that McKerracher and Robinson are using, but are, I'm just going to hyphenate it, are in view of ... is basically like what Heidegger's doing instead of what Husserl's doing with consciousness of, right? So Heidegger's going to bring in the fact that the hammer exists in view of the nail and the 2x4 and the creation of the house and the ultimate for the sake of which, of that entire referential totality of equipment, which is shelter for the sake of survival. He's saying, yeah, that, sure, tools which are in view of ... become objects of enjoyment, though, right? Like, sure, the are in view of is important for making sense of the hammer. The hammer is in reference to something else. It's in order to use the McKerracher and Robinson translation of being in time. The hammer is referring to some set of tasks. It's a response to a specific kind of need. It has a specific kind of directionality, function, goal. And Levinas is like, for sure, man, but also they become objects of enjoyment. Like you literally enjoy a hammer that has the right feel to it. It's not just intelligible as a better or worse hammer dependent on the task. You might use the wrong hammer for a task just because you like the way it feels more than the right hammer. The enjoyment of a thing, be it a tool, does not consist simply in bringing this thing to the usage for which it is fabricated, the pen to the writing, the hammer to the nail to be driven in, but also in suffering or rejoicing over this operation. And this is one of many places where he'll say suffering or enjoying, or he'll say pain or pleasure. But it's important that when he pains and joys is one way of saying it. Just remember, whenever he's saying enjoyment, he kind of includes both sides of the equation, the joys and the pains. His point is just that we're those kinds of beings who are deeply invested in the sensation of the world. We are steeped in the elemental, and we like the feeling of the sun on our face. And that's not something that lends itself to reflection for philosophers. It can lend itself to poetry and art, but even then, poetry and art cannot exhaust something going on there, right? Now, this level of enjoyment, which precedes representation, which is steeped in the elemental, which is a product of, or the cause of, the separation of that we experience in this life. I'm not sure. I just said the causal directionality there I'm putting into question. I don't think it's the most important thing. The point is that enjoyment is something we experience through sensation, and that sensation and enjoyment open up interiority. And that's part of what he's getting at when he's talking about separation. Like these things all kind of presuppose one another and are conditioned by living from ... We live from sensation. We live from enjoyment. And then I have to correct something that I said recently. I think I've said it like twice in reference to this text. I said that Levinas, one of his critiques of Heidegger is that Dasein never eats soup, right? I was confusing a couple of different quotes. Like at least twice in this book, the word soup will arise. And it's when Levinas is saying that we like a good bowl of soup, right? We like that. No, the line that I thought I was referring to, or was trying to get at, it's at the bottom of 134, when he says, Dasein in Heidegger is never hungry. That's the point. Dasein is never hungry. And he says that right before the beginning of section 4 of part B, which is where we're going to get into sensibility. Coming right out of the sections on enjoyment and sinking my teeth into the assimilated forces that become my forces, right? He's got another similar quote about, that involves teeth over here on 134. He says, "It is carefreeness with regard to existence, which has a positive meaning. It consists in sinking one's teeth fully into the nutriments of the world, agreeing to the world as wealth, releasing its elemental essence." Well, this idea of releasing the elemental essence of the world goes hand in hand with what happened on the previous page, which is either something that Bataille was inspired by, or that I think Levinas comes before Bataille, like by a couple decades at least. And so I'm pretty sure that Bataille could have been kind of falling asleep in a Levinas class. Who knows? And then he got something from this. Who knows? But if you look at the very bottom of 133, he says, to enjoy without utility, in pure loss, gratuitously, without referring to anything else, in pure expenditure. This is the human. And that's, Bataille was like, I'm going to take that and run with it, right? And that's at the bottom of a page where he was just talking about the enjoyment of the lighter, the enjoyment of the fork, the enjoyment of the cup on the lips. And so on page 133, you get micro-dosing jouissance and you get the idea of expenditure, which does not necessarily just mean the fork, the ornaments on the lighter. No, it also means that there's something special about being human that just loves sensation. We love to make things beautiful. We love to make things artistic. And this is why he's going to say that only a society of exploitation could produce a philosophy that says that food is just an implement. No, food is not just an implement. Food is something that we enjoy. Now, he's not being a hedonist through this section. He's giving hedonism its due. He wants to separate the exteriority that we are reliant upon in the elemental from the exteriority of the other. And actually, he starts out separation as life, which is the very beginning of this week's reading on page 109, by basically saying that he says that for this section, it will be necessary to show the difference that separates the relations analogous to transcendence from those of transcendence itself. So this is where we're separating the ilia, which is the French for the there is, which the elemental is our kind of like our only relation to the ilia is the elemental. Like the elemental is based in that sort of infinite expanse. But that kind of infinity that the elemental comes from, the sort of ground of the elemental, that kind of infinity is not this pure infinity that he wants to take us to. That's the infinity that of the outside for Nick Land. So this section where you read about the elemental and it's just so beautiful, just keep in mind that's the kind of outsideness or exteriority that Nick Land worships when he says, "Let coldness be my God." What Levinas is saying is that that kind of exteriority, that kind of transcendence is only analogous to the kind of exteriority and transcendence that he wants to get us to through the idea of infinity and the other. I'm basically going to close this thing out in a second. I want to keep it relatively short because I really like the idea of having these be very accessible, short lectures, just as a sort of primer for people who might not even be doing the readings, or just enough for you to have some kind of an idea of what you're getting into if you're doing the reading this week. Anne is in a meeting right now. She has for work. She'll be listening to this when she's at work at Amazon later today. And she was getting really excited about it. Last night, she was telling me all about how she just re-listened to last week's lecture. And, you know, she's not even doing the reading, but she's getting so much out of it. And she was saying that she was just like, she's getting way more out of this than she got from being in time. And she was getting a lot from being in time. Like she had a great time in being in time, but she's getting even more out of this now. I hope that a lot of people are feeling that way, and even more people will feel that way over time. But like I said, I want to keep this one pretty short. So I'm going to do a quick little recap, and I'm just going to draw a sort of causal chain of priority. All of the things that come before philosophy. Philosophers like to get to first principles. Those principles are usually in their heads. They have to do with ideas. Descartes thought that clear and distinct ideas, that's what knowledge is. And it's like, sure. And then, of course, you get Heidegger's going to show us like a way that there's something beyond ideas, and that the intelligibility of the pen or the hammer is in this referential totality of equipment. Sure. But still, you're not really tarrying with that thing that comes before all the rest, which is the fact that you are a body living from enjoyment. But I'm going to say it goes like this. It goes with sensation, to enjoyment, to separation. Like I said, this is not strictly causal. It doesn't have to be thought of this way. I want to put it up this way so I can talk about it this way for a second. To interiority, and then that sort of infinite capacity to just delve deeper and deeper into oneself and to be cut off from others is based in enjoyment and sensation, which is itself based in the elemental, living from. I'll just put the elemental. So sensation, enjoyment, separation, interiority. We get the other, So, I mean, when I put like exteriority before the other, it's like, well, but the exteriority he wants us to be thinking about is the other. Like the other, we wouldn't know about what he's trying to talk about as exteriority without the other. So, like I said, the causal thing kind of here, it can get a little wonky, but because then we can put infinity, right? Even though it's like the other is the face of this kind of infinity that he wants to talk about. And then, of course, it is that infinity, that other, that perfection, the idea of perfection that gives us this sort of need to justify ourselves, right? Need to justify, which also we could just say is apology, right? And all of that is prior to reason. And then, of course, like, it's because of reason that we then care about logic in the first place, right? Now, one of the big things that Brule is talking about in primitive mentality is that across all of these different societies, from Africa to Australia to the Fiji Islands, there is this ridicule of logic and this not taking seriously like the principle of non-contradiction. Well, continental philosophy itself has problems with the principle of non-contradiction, doesn't it? Let's go ahead and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to change the view so you can see it zoomed out a little bit. Is that better? See it a little bit better? But just remember, the entirety of this week's reading, all of this focus on dwelling in the elemental and of enjoyment, it doesn't get rolled out in this specific linear order. It's not that linear anyway. Sensation, enjoyment, separation, interiority, these things all are getting at something similar in different ways. They're all also in various ways synonymous, as is the case with exteriority, the other, infinity, perfection. But what I want to highlight is that there's a kind of exteriority for Levinas that gets in the way of the kind of infinity that he wants to talk about, that gets in the way of the kind of perfection that he wants to talk about, that makes us feel the need to justify, then makes us feel the need to engage in reason in the first place. And that is the exteriority of the elemental. Going back to the bottom of page 109. Let's go back there. Reread it. He says that it will be necessary to show the difference that separates the relations analogous to transcendence from those of transcendence itself. The relations of transcendence lead to the other, whose mode the idea of infinity has enabled us to specify. Even if they rest on transcendence, the relations analogous to transcendence and the objectifying act among them remain the same. Which is to say, he's going to be able to show us certain general principles just by focusing on these relations analogous to transcendence. Exteriority, transcendence, the same thing, right? Transcendence. Okay, well, transcendence in the face of the other, which I'll do that looks more like a dick than infinity. Hold on. Other / infinity. Okay, so we've got the other / infinity, yes, but analogous to transcendence. We've got The elemental. There's one quote I have to close out on. Where is it? I might just give up, but I thought I had it handy. Let's go to 131 really quick, just the bottom of the first paragraph. He says, things referred to possession can be carried off are furnishings. The medium from which they come to me lies escheat, a common fund or terrain essentially non-possessible, nobody's. So like all things that can be property come from something that can't be anybody's property. Earth, sea, light, city. Every relation or possession is situated within the non-possessible, which envelops or contains without being able to be contained or enveloped. We shall call it the elemental. The element has no forms containing it. It unfolds in its own dimension, depth. To tell the truth, at the bottom, to tell the truth, the element has no side at all. He was saying that we kind of like have access to a side of the ocean, right? Like we see the face of the ocean, right? Like the side. And he does play off of the word face here. It's not the face he's getting at when he talks about the face of the other, but it's analogous. And so you have the face of the ocean. You know that there's something there that's so much more beyond your comprehension, right? So it is a good analogy for what he wants to get at. He said, one does not approach it. The relation adequate to its essence discovers it precisely as a medium. One is steeped in it. I am always within the element. Man has overcome the elements only by surmounting this interiority without issue by the domicile, which confers upon him an extraterritoriality. He gets a foothold in the elemental by a side already appropriated, a field cultivated by me, the sea in which I fish and moor my boats, the forest in which I cut wood, and all these acts, all this labor, refer to the domicile. Man plunges into the elemental from the domicile, the primary appropriation of which we shall speak further. Lower down on page 132, he says, I'm going to read the middle. He says, we can, to be sure, represent the liquid or the gaseous to ourselves as a multiplicity of solids, but we then are abstracting from our presence in the midst of the element. The liquid manifests its liquidity, its qualities without support, its adjectives without substantive, to the immersion of the bather. The element presents us, as it were, the reverse of reality, without origin in a being, although presenting itself in familiarity of enjoyment, as though we were in the bowels of being. Hence we can say that the element comes to us from nowhere. The side it presents to us does not determine an object, remains entirely anonymous. It is wind, earth, sea, sky, air. Indetermination here is not equivalent to the infinite surpassing limits. It precedes the distinction between the finite and the infinite. It is not a question of a something, an existent manifesting itself as refractory to qualitative determination. At the bottom, he says, though, that the element separates us from the infinite. So I want you to just pay attention to how he is separating actual infinity in the way that he wants to talk about it from this sort of overwhelming depth and breadth of the quality that has no substance, that is the elemental, that we are steeped in, that we live off of, that we find enjoyment living off of, and that it is only for him possible to get this sense of the infinite after we've become separated from a direct participation in the elemental. Once we've more or less become domesticated humans with like this deep, super sophisticated and expansive sort of nuanced multiplicity of ways of servicing our enjoyments. That something about what it is to be a modern man for him is cut off from all of that, loses touch with all of that, but then can become enamored in it, in all of that again, right? You just think of like suburbanite, middle class American kids getting super into wilderness hiking and going out into the hills and the beauty of nature and the wild. Well, that was also something that was a very big deal for the Hitler Youth, right? And it's true. It's true that there's something there and it's amazing. But he's saying that that is only analogous to what he's trying to get at, which he'll get more into later. But for this week, he's just going to give the devil his due and say, you know what? There's a reason that we want to worship these impersonal forces. But the difference between these impersonal forces and the kind of pure infinity of the other and its transcendence that he wants to turn us to is that the real other actually has a face, speaks on its own behalf, and comes to the assistance or defense of its own meaning. And it's because of that that we can feel interpolated, that we can feel the need to be accountable, that we feel the need to justify ourselves, and therefore that we respond to the other, which is to say, it's because of all that that we're able to take responsibility. Thank you, and good luck with this week's reading to everybody who is reading it. It's going to be a lot of fun. I expect it'll make you want to use a lighter and drink some soup. You know, it makes me want to go swimming. Like that's what it made me want to go do. So I'm going to cut the recording off right here and then hang around for a bit of a discussion. See you guys on the other side. Subscribers get access to all past courses at Theory Underground, as well as ongoing courses taught by David McKerracher, Benjamin Studebaker, and Nina Power. Subscribers also get access to monthly research seminars, and the higher tiers of involvement unlock discussions and one-on-one small group tutelage. So if you're like me and you're never a huge bookish kind of person, but somewhere along the way you got really into listening to educational materials, if you got really into listening to podcasts and then books at work, if you love going deep into ideas, but you're just not a traditional bookish kind of person, well, this is where the alliance between people like us and people who are more bookish and specialized are able to meet to work through these things and do so in defense of the human, in defense of our dignity, in defense of our common humanity and our intellectual integrity. This is not a place where we're going to kick you out because you're pro-life or pro-choice, or where you are an atheist or a agnostic or a Christian. But it is a place where you're expected to love one another regardless of such things, and to show up for people in your actual IRL real life communities regardless of such things. And
If that is exciting for you, and if you're excited to learn about what this approach, this method, this school of thought has to offer, then I'm excited to meet you. Subscribe today.